Okay. Thanks for those that just joined. Sorry for the logistical issues we ran into. I was saying I'm in project management. It's kind of my space, so a little embarrassed. We should have had this covered. I worked with Stephanie before. She knows. She's not surprised. Okay. All right. Well, welcome managing software teams in Seattle meetup. All right. Some of us are in Seattle, but we're still virtual, which allows us to have a broader reach, which is great. All right. So we're starting off a little bit late. We'll kind of run through some of the logistics and then let Karen and Ron and I start the discussion, the main portion, and then we'll break out into small groups to really do part of the networking piece of why we're doing this, and then we'll come back to do some Q&A for Karen. And we'll be done by 7 Pacific time. Okay, so even though we started a little late, we'll still end on time. Because I know some of you are East Coast and up late. Everyone's done a Zoom meeting before. Okay, I don't know if we need to go over this, but keep your videos up. We like to see faces. Okay, if you're not talking, go ahead and mute. What we do here, why we have this meetup group, is really started around managing software development teams. And it's a hard position, right? You've got stakeholders from all ends. There's a lot of things happening at the same time. You're doing people management, but you're also still trying to stay abreast of the stuff in the code. It's a tough role. All right. So we started this, Ron and I started this meetup group really to try to build a community, work on professional development, give you some time to, pull your head up, right? And really take some time for yourself, get some professional development. Idea is to get more networking and meet more people. All right, learn from others, and hopefully you get actionable things out of this meetup, things that you can take back to your teams, make you a better manager. All right, so my background's a little different. I grew up in the military. I was an Air Force pilot. Flew the large C-17 cargo planes, and I was talking to Karen beforehand that I've done a lot of like leadership type training and really management training. And when I got into IT, realized that wasn't something that was offered. All right, so and I started a consulting firm called Form 100 Consulting. We take former military leaders and provide Scrum Master, product owner, agile coaching type roles. And everyone on our team kind of had the same insights. We're spending a lot of time with managers, that helping them with some of the challenges of management. So when I met Ron and we started talking about it, we thought let's do something. Let's create a community. Let's start this meetup. So we've been doing it now for pre-COVID, 2.5 years, 3 years, I think. Yeah, I have a handful of speakers and different topics that we breach.
And we remember the time when we were actually together in the same place.
That's right. Soon.
And had food.
And had food, yeah. We had food. Finding a venue, that was the logistical problem. We also have a meetup group. Okay, so I'm going to post the link to the meetup group in the chat. If you want to just be auto-informed of new things that are coming up, you can join the manager group, get notifications. We can create and have discussions there. If you have a question, you want to reach out to the community, you can reach out there. Find people to talk to, connect with. It's also a private group, so I approve everybody, so you won't get randomly spammed for things. All right. So like I said, I'll put the link in the chat. So
just did that, Nate.
Oh, thank you, Ron. Yep. So in the chat, and with that, I'm going to pass it over here to introduce Ron.
Yeah, and so I had the benefit of I arrived in Seattle 5 years ago, and I had the benefit of having this kind of a group going on in San Francisco and in the Valley for a whole bunch of years, and really found value from being able to get together with other other software development leaders and share challenges and share solutions and bring in some people like Karen who could provide some interesting and useful and helpful input to all of the craziness that, as Nate was talking about, the challenges that all of us face. Nate, if you can go on to the next one. So I wrote this book, Managing the Unmanageable. If any of you want a copy of this at the discount that Mickey and I, my co-author, and I get, take a screenshot of the discount code and the URL to go to get it. It's possible that Amazon's cheaper, but which happens once in a while, in a rare while. But the rest of the time, this is the cheapest way to get a copy. All right, so Karen started her career as a programmer. We have interesting things going on with, but it's coming back. So Karen started her career as a programmer. She was a programmer for almost a dozen years, and then at Macromedia got promoted and got promoted and got promoted. So I dropped into Macromedia almost 20 years ago in an evangelist role for a development tool technology that all of us thought was the coolest thing any of us had seen. What became known as Flex later, it was called Royale then as a code name. And I know that I met Karen because she's in my quick decks, but both of us are like, yeah, I don't remember what we talked about. But 10 years ago, my daughter, who was at that point a program manager and scrum master at Adobe, reintroduced Karen and me. And so we've known each other. Actually known each other for the last decade. Karen was a VP at Macromedia. She had become a VP at Adobe. She left. She actually left Adobe and pivoted her career into consulting about the time I did the same thing. So we've been consultants almost the same amount of time as well. And she's been focused on leadership and women in leadership and helping women in technology to blossom in leadership, which is just a wonderful thing. And she's written this book, which I can get it to display, Better Allies, Everyday Actions to Create Inclusive, Engaging Workplaces, which I'm sorry to say, hey, I have not read all of yet. I was really hoping I was going to have all of it read by the time we had this conversation, but I did read the chapter on feedback. I had to jump ahead one chapter, so that tells you where I am. So I'm a chapter short, except that I read the chapter on feedback. And I think with that, no, we've got a couple of polls, Nate, and then we'll let Karen introduce herself, and we'll go into discussion of the three of us, do the breakout rooms, and then come back for a discussion with everyone.
Yeah, sounds right. So here, let me launch this poll question. I think this is a good way to start us off. Can you see the poll question? Okay. Okay, we got 13 of 16. All right, I think that's pretty good participation. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And let's share the results. Okay. Other results shared?
Yes, we saw them.
Perfect. Okay. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and introduce Karen. So welcome again. Thank you thank you so much for agreeing to chat with us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for hosting me.
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes we do this as a speaker, but as a presentation mode, but this time we're going to do more of a Q&A conversation.
So
That's
do
what
you
I'm for.
want to do some kind of introductory remarks, Karen, or do you want to kick off with
Let's
questions?
go.
Yeah, no, I thought I'd start off by just sharing kind of the backstory. Like Ron, you did a great job introducing me, but that backstory of how I came to actually write this book, like what, how did I move from being a VP of engineering to this author and focusing on inclusive workplaces? So sound good? I'll just start there.
Please.
Great. Okay. So yeah, the backstory. So as you heard from the introduction that Ron did, I used to work in tech. I worked in tech for 25 years. And during the 25 years that I did have that tech career, I did notice a decline happening in gender diversity. And this, I've been in the industry a long time, but there used to be more women getting computer science degrees and entering this very lucrative profession. And it changed over the 25 years that I was working in tech. And so while I was still at Adobe, I was the most senior woman in engineering. And I was like, I have a role to play here for women at my company. And so I started mentoring a lot of women, started advocating for gender kind of representation at events we were holding and sponsoring like women's book clubs and just doing things like that. And I have to tell you, over time, I must admit, I like doing that kind of work a lot more than being a VP of engineering. And I paid attention to how I was feeling. And I decided, I do need to make a change here. I want to be helping women, not just at my company, but kind of across the tech industry. I want to help women be successful, grow their careers, and stay in this field if that's where they wanted to be. So I started my own coaching business, a leadership coaching business, primarily looking at helping women who are working in tech. But I'll have to admit, I soon realized I thought it was just so wonderful. I was having this, great success, wonderful leadership coaching practice. But I soon realized that I actually had a big problem that I needed to address. And this problem was that I could be the best coach on the planet, which I don't think I am, but I could be. And all of my clients still were facing an uphill battle because they were all working in tech companies where the closer you got to the C-suite, to the top, just the maler and paler it got. And with all due respect to anyone who's joined today who's male and or pale, I'm white myself, this is not going to be about shaming and blaming. I'm just talking about the demographics. The demographics showed that these companies that my clients were working at weren't the true meritocracies I think most of us want our companies to be. Meritocracies where you get ahead on your merits, the impact, the work you're doing, because frankly, white men were getting ahead at a faster pace than everybody else. So that's when I was like, okay, to help my coaching clients, I actually need to make their workplaces more inclusive. And in fact, I want to make workplaces everywhere more inclusive. Now, you can laugh at me, like, who am I, like one person over here thinking I could solve such a huge problem? I get it. But I was naive, but determined. And so I was like, I'm going to take a stab at this. I am going to help people realize that there are simple everyday actions they can take to be more inclusive in the meetings they attend, with the feedback they give, and so forth. So I was like, I'm going to change the world. What's the first thing anyone does these days when they want to change the world? Well, they start a Twitter handle. So this goes back now 2014. I started a Twitter handle. I called it @BetterAllies. And I started sharing these simple everyday actions people could take. Like I pledged, and it was all first person, I still try to do that today. I pledged to notice when interruptions happen in a meeting and redirect the conversation back to, hey, I'd like to hear Anne finish what she was saying. Just a simple thing like that. Be more aware and do that. Or make sure that there were, as we're thinking about reviewing resumes, for example. Well, I am going to look at the, what I think are the perceived genders of the resumes we're reviewing and just make sure we're not eliminating the, one gender more than another gender. So just sort of like these simple things I thought people could do if they only were paying attention. Well, that Twitter handle led to me getting speaking engagements. People ask me to go to conferences or companies and talk about this whole approach. And every time I then was giving a talk during that Q&A, someone would ask, hey, Karen, this talk was good, but do you have a book? Because we want more. And the first time it's like, no, I don't have a book. Second time it happened, I was like, no, not yet, no book yet. Third time, it's like, yeah, I know I've got to write a book. So anyway, I did write that book. And Ron, thanks for holding it up before, but the book's called Better Allies as well. So that's the backstory. Thanks for sticking with me there. Anyway, and as I said, I'm just honored to be here tonight talking with all of you.
Perfect. Yeah, we're happy to have you. So the book Better Allies, can you maybe tell us about a time when someone acted as your ally, when you saw that in your career?
Yeah, oh, my favorite story is it was soon after I had joined Adobe. And I remember sitting in a large engineering leadership meeting. I think it was all men and me, maybe one other woman in the room. And I heard my boss, who's a senior vice president, I heard him say, well, what I learned from Karen Catlin is the following. And he went on to summarize something I'd shared with him in a previous one-on-one, probably last week. But the fact that he said he had learned something from me, the kind of the new hire, it made me feel great, as you can imagine. But he also, I think, helped me build credibility with all my new peers, the people I was going to have to start working with very closely on some improvements I needed to make, some kind of cross-team collaboration projects and so forth. He helped me build credibility with that simple phrase of what I learned from Karen is the following. And I love sharing that story because it underscores, gosh, how simple is that to just give people those kind of shout outs and help build their credibility as someone who is underrepresented in that room. Yeah. Okay. So Nate, that's my story. Any chance you have like an ally story, maybe a time someone acted as your ally, or maybe a time you wish you had been someone's ally? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, so I briefly talked about being in the Air Force. I went to the Air Force Academy. I think we have a West Point and a Navy grad here too, but that's okay. They went to the Air Force Academy. I remember there is a ramp there when I got, so they didn't let women in until the class of 1980. So that was the first female allowed into the school, and they still had a ramp there. It was called the Bring Me Men ramp. Right. And so, you know, that was something that ended up when I was there getting taken down, right? Because it was very, focused on men, right? So it said bring me men. So that's kind of it. When that got brought down, I think that helped some. And just growing up in that kind of culture of a male dominated industry, right? And so the one thing I liked about flying was the feedback's pretty you give a lot of feedback when you're flying, whether it's right away or after. And yeah, I mean, I always thought that we did a pretty good job of giving feedback based on performances. But I would also say that I flew with people that had grown up earlier in the career where you could see where maybe they were less excited about having females in the cockpit, right? So, I mean, that's kind of my story, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate what you shared. You've seen change, and you've seen how hard it is for some people to leave behind maybe what they're used to and comfortable with, but really for the good of everybody. We need pilots of all genders to be doing that important work. Yeah. Thanks, Nate.
Yeah, so I want to bring us back to the focus of tonight, which is feedback.
Sure.
And giving feedback and bringing inclusiveness as a result of doing better at giving feedback. So in your book, you point out, Karen, that women are less likely to receive constructive feedback than men are. And obviously a really clear impact on their careers. So maybe share a little bit more about that and a little bit more about the impact, as well as maybe why that happens and what we can do about it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ron. Yeah, so when I was doing research for my book, I came across a handful of studies that looked at the kind of feedback that people get. A lot of it is there's difference in gendered feedback. I am going to be touching and talking about race as well and how that plays in here. But a lot of the studies that I found have been done by social scientists on this whole topic of, do people get equal feedback, equitable feedback? And two things I'll share with you tonight. Two things really stuck out with me when I was doing that. The first is that we tend to not want to give feedback. And I'm talking about the feedback that's really constructive and career growing feedback, right? This is how to improve. We tend not to give that feedback to people who are different from us. So if we are a man in a male dominated industry, such as software, we might not give that constructive career growing feedback to a woman because, hey, I don't want her to think I'm sexist, so I'm going to lay it, or pull back a little bit from the real tough kind of criticism and feedback. I don't want her to think I'm sexist. If I'm white, maybe I don't want to give this kind of feedback to someone of color because I don't want them to think I'm racist. If I'm not living with a visible disability, perhaps I'm not going to give feedback to someone who's disabled because I don't want them to think I'm biased against people who are disabled. Here's another one for all our friends here who have been in the armed services too, is hey, if I went to a highly selective university and got my computer science degree, maybe I have a PhD in it, maybe I'm not going to give feedback to someone who learned how to code in the armed services. And it's a different thing. I don't want them to think I'm biased against people who came up through a different training program than me. So we hold back from giving this career growing feedback to people who aren't like us. So that's the first thing I want to point out and I learned. The second thing is when we do give feedback, it's actually very different. It's different. We give feedback that's different to women than the kind of feedback we give to men. There was a big study that Stanford did on, and somehow it's amazing, but they got access to thousands of annual performance reviews at 3 large tech companies and a professional services company, okay? So they had actual performance reviews and they studied the differences between the gender differences in these performance reviews. And they found that women got less feedback that was tied to business outcomes. They got more feedback just on their personality. And they weren't as likely to get feedback about what new skills they needed to learn to have a bigger impact. Oh, and they also got shorter reviews, so less information that they could actually learn from. So what does that look like? Just ran through a few different examples or qualities of the different feedback. A woman might get feedback such as, well, people like working with you. And that's personality based. People like working with you. Sounds nice, but compare that to what a man might get. A man might get something like, hey, you were excellent at increasing collaboration on the teams, and that leads us to deliver our projects on time. And next quarter, we'd like you to run a pilot with this new tool to help us scale our efforts even more. Okay, so I hope I'm just highlighting, and I'm totally making this up as I go here, but I'm highlighting how actionable and helpful that kind of feedback is compared to people like working with you. Okay, so those are some differences that we should all be aware of as we think about allyship and how we can be allies for people who we are giving feedback to. Don't soften your feedback. Give that critical feedback, which is so important for people to grow their careers. And whenever you're giving feedback, make sure that it is tied to business outcomes. Here's how your work is making a difference. And make sure that you are writing reviews of the same length. Make sure that people are actually getting equal feedback. If you're like in a management position, writing reviews for your whole team, do a word check and make sure that you are actually being equitable there too.
So my guess is, Karen, that there's a rule of thumb that no review feedback should be a surprise.
Oh yeah. Of course.
And of course, right. And hopefully everyone on this Zoom call knows that. But if you're feeling And I'm guessing if we're feeling uncomfortable about giving feedback in person, in fact, that hard feedback may appear for the very first time on a review.
Which should never be the case. We all
Never
know
be the
that.
case.
Oh my gosh, Ron, I'm so focused on like the allyship part that I wasn't even thinking about. Well, yep, best practice for giving any kind of review is never make it a surprise. Yeah, definitely. So thank you.
Yeah, which I guess kind of segues into a lot of times when you do give feedback, you're in person on one-on-one meetings or in a call one-to-one or potentially in a hallway. But it's usually in person one-on-one is typically how most feedback's given. So is there anything allies should be aware of in this setting?
Oh, so just like that, yeah, the more casual, not the formal annual review time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and this gets back to first principles, I'll say, is feedback needs to be built or given on a foundation of trust. That psychological safety we all hear about. People need to know that you're giving them feedback because it's in your best interest. They're trying to be helpful, provide some career guidance, provide some something that they could be doing differently to have a bigger impact on whatever their job is, right? So that psychological safety, that level of trust, that foundation needs to be in place. So as I think about that and allyship, I also want to layer on top of all of that, that most of us unfortunately have these things that are called just like me networks that are full of people like us because we like hanging out with them. We have something in common with them. Sometimes that's based on gender. Sometimes that's based on race. Sometimes that's based on some hobby or other interest we might have, right? But an important part of being an ally is to make sure that we are diversifying our network to make sure, every time a new employee joins the team, the greater team, the group, that we are actually getting to know them, regardless of do we think we have something in common with them or not. And so make sure you're diversifying your network, getting to know people so that if you are giving them feedback, that they feel that they already know you a little bit and that they trust you to be doing things in their best interest. So I think that's super important. Another thing I'll mention from an ally lens is there have been a few studies in the last few years about the experience of Black employees in corporate America. And one survey study I was reading is that it identified a number of microaggressions that Black people experience at work. And microaggressions, if you're not familiar with that, it's a small slight that doesn't really, if it happened only once, wouldn't be a big deal. But when it happens over and over, perhaps daily even, it's like death by 1,000 cuts kind of thing. So microaggressions add up over time and they're a big deal. We should be paying attention to them. What are some of these microaggressions that Black employees brought up? One is that they never have like informal interactions with leaders. Informal interactions being like, hey, if they run into each other in the elevator or getting a cup of coffee, it's like, hey, how was your weekend? That type of informal interaction. And if they don't have those informal interactions with leaders, again, they might not have that sense of, I know you, I trust you, and that avenue starts to get paved for receiving feedback and giving feedback. So make sure again that you're diversifying your network and actually getting to know a lot of people that you are working with, if not everyone. So that's the first thing I'd say just about the casual feedback is we need that foundation of trust. We need to know people. And then I'll also say just again, first principles, practical feedback here about giving feedback is ask someone, hey, are you open to hearing some feedback on that presentation you just gave or that demo that you just gave? Are you open to have some feedback, or can we touch base later in the week? Doing that allows someone who's maybe just having a bad day, or if they're in a rush for something, or if they're having one of those hangry moments, so angry, they're so hungry, they're angry. It just gives them the ability to say, this is not a good time. So ask permission if you can give feedback. And then once they say, yeah, I love, and this is that casual feedback, that everyday kind of things, I love here's one thing you could have done better. Here's one thing you could have done better in that demo the next time you give it. Here's one thing that you could have done differently as you were trying to get support for your idea. Something like that. One thing doesn't make it sound like this person's really been like bottling it up and waiting to have this big conversation with me, right? It's just more casual, just like, yeah, here's one thing. Open to some feedback. Yeah, here's one thing you could have done better. So I recommend that, getting just comfortable with that and just doing a lot of that and making sure, again, we're doing it even with people that aren't like us based on our gender, race, and so forth.
Mhm. That's great. I like the one thing idea. I think that's great. We used to, in the Air Force, we always do the feedback sandwich where it was like, hey, you did this great. That was an awful landing. And then you did this great, and so you kind of mix it up that way. So a good kind of segue here. What about like landmines when you're giving feedback to someone who's from underrepresented demographic, for example?
Okay.
Like how do you, what's some advice for those scenarios?
Okay, landmines. Yeah, let's talk about some landmines. Okay. First of all, like landmines are things to avoid, so I get it. And in the work I do on allyship, I know that things can get uncomfortable at times, that we sometimes even pull back from some of this topic, this work, because like, I don't want to step in one of those landmines. I don't want to make a mistake. This stuff is so complicated. I am afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing and do more damage than otherwise. But when you step back from doing this work as allies, whether it's giving feedback or acting in other ways, when you step back, you're basically saying, I'm cool with how things are. I'm cool with lack of diversity in my company, my industry. I'm cool with it. In fact, you become complicit when you aren't actually actively trying to make some change. So folks, please get comfortable with making mistakes. I make them all the time too. I feel like I'm on a journey to be a better ally. We're gonna make mistakes. It's okay. When you make them, you apologize, you learn from them, you pledge to do better. So that said, though, I want to answer your question, Nate. That was sort of like taking a big step back from where those landmines might be. Here is one landmine I'll share. Sometimes the feedback we give to people is complimentary. We're giving them positive feedback, which is also really important. And when we compliment people, please, especially with people from underrepresented groups, don't do so in a way that makes them feel different than everyone else, makes them feel othered. For example, if I've heard this story from many friends and colleagues who are of Asian descent here in America, they might be giving a presentation and someone says, hey, you speak such great English. Where are you from? Like something like that. And it's like, well, yeah, I grew up in Connecticut. What's the big deal? That type of thing. So don't make them, as you compliment someone, don't make it about them being different or looking different or something like that. Instead, compliment them on the impact of their work. That presentation you just gave is the best ever. Like, I love the format you followed, whatever it is, like something about the impact that they had, not about how they look different, okay? And here's another landmine is calling people of color articulate. Great demo just now. You are so articulate, okay? And what I hear from Black people is that may sound like a compliment to many of us, but in reality, they're like, well, what are you comparing me to? And why wouldn't you think I'd be articulate? I'm a professional here. I'm perhaps, have a lot of schooling behind me, whatever. But why would you think I wouldn't be articulate? So it's not maybe the compliment we think it might be. So look out for paying those compliments and make sure that we aren't making anyone feel different or othered as a result.
So Karen, I want to ask you about 360-degree reviews, because here's where we bring input from peers into the review cycle, which generally seems like a good thing. How does our allyship play relative to 360-degree reviews? Because we can, so I don't know, my thinking is that we can see biases coming in from peers that we have to deal with.
Yeah. So if you are asked to give 360 feedback, and it seems like that is something done at many companies, large and small. So if you are asked to give 360 feedback, please remember that people who are underrepresented based on their gender or their race and ethnicity or something else, people who are underrepresented feel they have to work harder than everyone else to be measured the same as everyone else. And if anyone here, I do believe we have some Black people in the group today. I hear from Black friends, it's like, yeah, I got coaching. I had to be twice as good as everyone else, in school, twice as good as the white people at school, the white students. Maybe that's similar to some experiences in this room. But it also, I see it in my white coaching clients who are women. They feel I have to over prepare because they have to have everything perfect when they are doing any work and presenting work, for example. So people who are underrepresented feel they have to be twice as good. So with that, make sure you're singing their praises so that people who are reading that 360 are actually seeing that this person, regardless of if they're working twice or hard or not, but like make sure that you are highlighting when they are doing a good job so that they get that positive reinforcement and that anyone in management can also be seeing that this person is doing a good job. So sing praises. That's my thing. Of course, you want to be genuine and all of that, but look for opportunities to really be complimentary in those about the work they're doing. And the other thing I'd say, and this is for if you are writing 360 feedback, submitting it, or if you're on the receiving end too, but there is this wonderful rule of thumb. I talk about it in my book called the flip it to test it rule. And it's great for seeing if you are at all biased in your feedback or something you're thinking about. Flip it to test it. So if you were about to give some feedback to someone, write it in a 360 form, and that person is underrepresented, just pause and say, would I say the same thing about, a white man, for example? Would I say that same kind of feedback? They're so articulate, for example, might be one of those, or something else. When you flip it to say, would I say the same thing about someone who's in the majority, you may catch yourself for bias. And I'm going to pull away a little bit from feedback here and give you an example of what that might look like. In my book, I share a story about a time I had a man who reported to me. He managed a small team and he had a new headcount that he got to fill. And his headcount was more senior than anyone else on his team. And I asked him, are you going to offer it a promotion to, I'll call her Sue. I don't remember her name, what I used in the book, anonymized it, but are you going to offer it to Sue, your best employee? And he said, oh no, she has 2 young children at home and I don't think she'd want the travel associated with this job. So I'm not going to offer it to her. And I must admit, I thank you. For whatever reason, I thought of, well, I need to say this in the moment. I need to speak up. I'm like, that's not your decision to make. That's her decision. If you think she would be a good person, you need to go offer it to her and have that conversation. If she doesn't want it, she can say so. So anyway, he went ahead, offered it. She took the job. She was amazing. She could handle the travel. That did not get in the way of her doing a fabulous job in this new role. So if that manager of mine, though, this guy, if he had flipped it, would he ever say that about a man? He has young children at home and he just wouldn't want the travel. Probably not. And so that's a great time to say, okay, there's a little bit of bias here. And we can apply that same test, that flip it to test it rule to feedback we're giving as well. Yeah. I want to read the comments. There's a lot of chat going on. Thank you. Yeah. Listen, he would not. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's great information. Thanks again, Karen. What we're going to try to do now, and I say try because I'm having logistical problems all day today, is go into a small group breakout. So we're going to break out into a few small groups, probably do it for about 10 minutes, I think, and really introduce yourself. kind of get to know each other. And what we really want to do is have you come up with a question to ask Karen from the audience. And so we'll come back after 10 minutes and we'll do a final Q&A to wrap up the event.
So identify, coming out of your breakout rooms, identify the question that your room would most like to ask Karen, and then we'll do a go round. And our experience has been that those questions are so good that we only ever get around about once.
Right. So I'm going to try to create the breakout rooms.
And why don't you stop the recording, Nate?
Oh, yeah, good call.
That will let people speak freely in their breakout rooms as well as when we come back.
Yeah, I'm not sure how the recording would work in multiple breakouts. But I'll stop.
Actually, the way it works is it follows you around, but yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay. I'm opening all rooms. And everyone should be invited to join, so they can go ahead and jump into their breakouts.
Nate, can you stop the recording?
Yeah. I think I'm a logistical mess right now, so I'm sorry.
You got this, Nate. We believe in you.
All good.
Thanks, Ann.